The house became quiet in a way Claire Harper had never known after her mother passed away, not the peaceful kind of quiet but the kind that followed you from room to room and sat beside you even when you were not alone, and the moment she stepped inside her childhood home in Vermont she felt it wrap around her chest like cold air, making it hard to breathe. Everything looked the same but nothing felt right. The family photos still lined the staircase, the old clock still ticked in the living room, and her mother's favorite chair still faced the window, yet there was a stillness that made time feel stuck, as if the house itself was waiting for someone who would never come back. Claire had not planned to stay long. She told herself she was only here for a few days, just long enough to help her father settle things and then return to her steady life in Boston where work kept her busy and silence never had time to grow, but grief had a way of slowing things down without asking permission. Her father, Martin Harper, looked older than she remembered, his hair more gray, his eyes more distant, and though he smiled when he saw her, it was a careful smile, the kind people wore when they were trying not to fall apart. He hugged her tightly, holding on a moment longer than usual, and Claire realized this house was no longer just a place filled with memories, it was now a place filled with absence. Over the next few days, they moved around each other quietly, sharing meals in near silence, exchanging small words that avoided anything too heavy, both pretending that everything was normal when it clearly was not. Martin spent long hours sitting near the window or in the study, staring at old papers or nothing at all, while Claire cleaned and organized, folding clothes that still carried her mother's scent and packing away parts of a life that had ended without warning. At night, Claire lay awake in her childhood room, listening to the wind outside and the faint sound of her father moving through the house, and she wondered how two people could grieve the same person in such different ways while feeling equally lost. On the fourth evening, rain began to fall steadily, tapping against the windows as if trying to get inside, and they sat together at the dining table with half-finished cups of tea between them when Martin finally spoke, his voice low and hesitant, asking Claire if she could stay longer than planned. The request surprised her not because he needed help but because of the way he asked, careful and unsure, as if he feared her answer. Claire looked up, studying his face, seeing the loneliness he tried so hard to hide, and though she wanted to say yes instantly, fear rose in her chest, fear of putting her life on hold, fear of being pulled too deeply into sorrow, fear of losing herself in this quiet house. She asked him how long, and he shook his head slowly, saying he didn't know, saying only that the nights were too quiet now and the days felt empty, and that he wasn't asking her to replace anyone or give up her future, just asking her not to leave so soon. Claire felt torn, standing between who she had been before and who this moment was asking her to become, and as she looked around the house one more time, at the shadows on the walls and the chair her mother would never sit in again, she realized that leaving might be easier, but staying might be necessary, not just for her father, but for herself too, because grief did not disappear when you walked away from it, it only waited for you to slow down enough to feel it. After the funeral, life at home felt unbearably quiet for Emily. The house, once warm with her mother's laughter and comforting presence, now felt like a hollow shell. Her father, Richard, who had always been strong and composed, seemed to crumble behind closed doors, his grief masked by a stoic exterior. Emily noticed how he would sit silently in the evenings, staring at the empty armchair where her mother used to read, the lines on his face deepening with each passing day. He began leaving small notes for her around the house, reminders to eat, to rest, or just gentle words that said more than he could speak aloud. Emily felt a mix of sadness and helplessness. She wanted to comfort him, to ease his pain, but didn't know how. One night, as she sat at the kitchen table studying, Richard quietly came in, carrying a box of her mother's belongings. He placed it gently before her and said, "I think it's time you know everything she wanted you to have, everything that mattered to her." Emily opened the box slowly, finding letters, old photographs, and a journal. As she read her mother's words, she realized how much her mother had loved them both and how she had always trusted Emily to continue caring for the family in her absence. The next few days brought an unspoken understanding between father and daughter. Richard began inviting Emily to join him on small errands, asking her opinion on household matters, and even sharing stories about her mother that she had never heard before. Emily started noticing subtle changes in her father, a vulnerability he had never shown before, and a yearning for connection that mirrored her own longing to feel close to him again. Yet, with this closeness came tension. Richard's sadness sometimes turned into irritability, and Emily struggled to find the balance between being supportive and needing her own space. One evening, while they were organizing old photo albums together, Richard paused, his hand trembling slightly as he held a picture of Emily's mother laughing at a picnic. "I don't know how to move forward without her," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Emily reached for his hand, feeling a surge of protectiveness and a strange, almost unfamiliar warmth toward him that she couldn't entirely name. They sat in silence, holding hands over the photographs, the room heavy with memories and the quiet ache of grief. Over time, their shared sorrow began to forge a deeper bond, a connection built on mutual loss, understanding, and the need to lean on one another. Emily found herself thinking about him more often, noticing the way he smiled softly at small things, the way his eyes reflected a kind of loneliness she had never seen before. She started joining him on walks in the park, talking about trivial matters at first, then gradually revealing more personal thoughts, fears, and dreams. Richard, in turn, began opening up about his own struggles, confessing how lost he felt and how much he relied on Emily to keep the home alive, to keep the memories of her mother vibrant in their hearts. It was during one of these walks, under a sky painted with the soft hues of dusk, that Emily realized how much she cherished these moments, how their grief had brought them closer in ways she hadn't expected. The lines between fatherly love and something more tender began to blur, subtle and unspoken, a quiet tension that neither dared to acknowledge aloud. Emily found herself lingering on his words, on the warmth of his hand in hers, on the protective comfort he offered without ever overstepping boundaries. Richard, too, seemed to notice the change, catching himself staring a moment too long, his heart stirring with emotions he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. The house, once echoing with emptiness, now hummed with a fragile intimacy, a blend of shared sorrow and tentative hope. Emily struggled with guilt for feeling attraction toward the man who had always been her father figure, yet she couldn't deny the growing closeness, the way their grief had intertwined their lives in ways that felt both comforting and unsettling. Nights became the hardest. She would lie awake, thinking of him in the quiet of the darkened house, feeling the weight of both sorrow and a longing she didn't fully understand. Richard, on his part, found solace in her presence, often lingering by her door, listening to the soft rhythm of her breathing before retreating to his room with a mix of relief and an unspoken ache. The dynamic of their relationship continued to evolve, each day bringing moments of tender connection, shared laughter over memories of her mother, and the occasional, unguarded glance that spoke volumes without words. Emily began to recognize the subtle ways he cared for her, preparing her favorite meals, leaving small notes of encouragement, and simply being there when she felt overwhelmed. For Richard, these moments became lifelines, reminders that he wasn't alone, that his daughter's presence kept him grounded. Yet, amid the healing, an undercurrent of tension lingered, a quiet, forbidden energy neither could name, simmering beneath the surface of their growing closeness. The story of their grief, love, and evolving bond became a delicate dance, each step careful, tentative, yet undeniably charged with emotion. As the days turned into weeks, Emily found herself caught between loyalty to her mother's memory, the instinct to support her father, and the surprising, confusing stirrings of feelings that went beyond familial love. Richard, too, grappled with his emotions, torn between the role of a grieving father and the unexpected, unspoken pull he felt toward the daughter who had become his anchor. Their lives, once defined by loss and sorrow, began to shift in subtle ways, colored by tenderness, quiet longing, and the complexity of human emotion. Each shared meal, each lingering conversation, each walk in the park became an opportunity to explore the depth of their connection, to navigate the fine line between familial devotion and the awakening of a more personal, intimate bond. The tension, at first barely perceptible, grew into a gentle, persistent current, a quiet question lingering in the spaces between them: could they find solace in each other without betraying the memory of the woman who had brought them together, or was their bond destined to remain unspoken, simmering beneath the surface? Emily's heart ached with the complexity of it all, the grief, the love, the confusion, and the subtle excitement of emotions she had never felt for anyone in her life. She began to understand that moving forward didn't mean forgetting, It meant embracing the new dynamics life had thrust upon them, walking a careful path between remembrance and the undeniable human need for connection. Richard, too, realized that the void left by her mother could never be filled, but perhaps, together, they could create a new form of closeness, one that honored the past while allowing their hearts to heal in unexpected ways. And so, their days continued, a tapestry of grief, tenderness, longing, and the quiet anticipation of what their deepening bond might lead to, leaving Emily and Richard standing at the threshold of emotions neither had expected, yet both could not ignore, a question hanging silently in the air: how far could love stretch when born from loss, and would they find the courage to navigate it together? As the weeks passed, Emily noticed subtle changes in herself she hadn't expected. The quiet evenings spent with her father, once heavy with grief, now carried moments of warmth that lingered long after the sun had set. She found herself looking forward to their conversations, the gentle way Richard listened to her thoughts, the way he shared memories of her mother with a tenderness that made her heart ache with both sorrow and admiration. One afternoon, while sorting through old letters her mother had left behind, Emily stumbled upon a note addressed to her father. It was filled with loving reminders and wishes for the two of them to continue supporting each other, to find strength in their bond even without her. The words struck Emily deeply, and she realized how much her mother had trusted her to be a source of comfort for her father, yet also how much she wanted both of them to find happiness in life, even after her passing. That evening, Emily prepared dinner for the two of them, a small gesture she hadn't done before, and as Richard stepped into the kitchen, she saw a look in his eyes that was part gratitude, part longing, and something else she couldn't quite name. They ate together in silence at first, the only sounds being the clink of cutlery and the soft hum of the evening outside. As the night wore on, their conversation shifted from practical matters to personal reflections, memories of laughter with her mother, and quiet hopes for the future. Emily caught herself noticing the way his hand moved when he spoke, the subtle lines around his eyes that deepened when he smiled, and a warmth in his voice that made her chest tighten in an unfamiliar way. She tried to brush aside the thoughts, attributing them to grief and closeness, but the feeling lingered, growing each day into something she couldn't easily ignore. Richard, on his part, began to realize how much he relied on Emily for companionship, for understanding, for the sense of family that had been shattered by loss. He found himself looking forward to her presence more than he expected, feeling a quiet comfort when she laughed at something small or shared a story from her day. One rainy afternoon, as they sat together watching the droplets race down the window, Richard spoke in a hushed tone about his fears, his loneliness, and the emptiness he felt without her mother. Emily, moved by his vulnerability, reached out and placed her hand over his, feeling a jolt of emotion neither of them could explain. It was a touch meant for reassurance, but it carried a weight that made their hearts race. They didn't speak about it, but the air between them shifted, charged with unspoken longing and a delicate tension. The following days brought more moments like this: shared coffee in the morning, quiet walks in the park, lingering conversations that often stretched long into the evening. Emily found herself thinking of Richard when he wasn't around, noticing his absence, missing the sound of his voice and the gentle encouragement he offered. Richard, too, felt a magnetic pull toward her, a desire to protect and cherish that went beyond the ordinary father-daughter bond, leaving him confused and conflicted. He struggled with guilt for the emotions stirring inside him, yet he couldn't deny the comfort and joy Emily brought into his life, the way her presence softened his grief and made him feel alive again. One evening, while clearing out the attic together, they discovered a box of her mother's old belongings, photos, letters, and keepsakes that revealed a side of her they had both forgotten. As they sorted through the memories, their hands brushed repeatedly, each touch sending an unexpected warmth through both of them. They laughed softly at old photos, shared stories of family vacations, and allowed themselves to remember not just the loss but the love that had once filled their home. It was in these quiet, intimate moments that the bond between them deepened, evolving into something richer, more complex, and undeniably tender. Emily began to notice the way Richard looked at her sometimes, the soft gaze that lingered a moment too long, the gentle smile that seemed to hold unspoken feelings. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was just shared grief and closeness, yet she couldn't deny the flutter in her chest each time their eyes met. Richard, for his part, found himself struggling with the line between parental love and something more, a pull he didn't fully understand but couldn't ignore. He began seeking excuses to spend time with her, suggesting walks, movie nights, or even just sitting together in the living room with quiet conversation, enjoying the simple joy of her presence. One late night, as they reviewed old family albums, a thunderstorm rolled outside, and the house was filled with the sound of rain pounding against the windows. They huddled close on the couch, their shoulders brushing, hearts pounding with a mixture of fear, grief, and something far more intimate. Emily felt an urge to comfort him that went beyond words, a desire to be near him, to offer solace not just as a daughter but as someone who could share the depth of emotion that both of them were feeling. Richard, feeling the warmth of her hand on his arm, realized how much he longed for her closeness, how much her presence had become essential to him in a way he hadn't anticipated. They talked about memories, hopes, regrets, and dreams, their voices low, soft, and full of unspoken emotions that neither could put into words. Every glance, every touch, every shared laugh became a thread weaving them closer together, creating a delicate intimacy that was both comforting and electric. Emily struggled with guilt for the feelings stirring within her, questioning whether it was appropriate to feel this attraction toward the man who had always been her father figure, yet she couldn't deny the undeniable draw, the warmth, the tenderness that filled her chest whenever he was near. Richard, too, wrestled with his emotions, recognizing the powerful connection they shared but fearing the implications, the crossing of a line that society would not understand. Yet, in the privacy of their shared grief, the quiet of the empty house, the storm outside, they found a space where vulnerability and longing coexisted, a place where their hearts could speak without words. Days turned into weeks, and their closeness continued to deepen, each day a mixture of emotional support, subtle attraction, and tender moments that neither fully understood but both cherished. Emily noticed small gestures he made for her, leaving notes of encouragement, preparing her favorite meals, and simply being present in ways that made her feel safe, seen, and valued. Richard, in turn, found that her laughter, her insights, and her presence brought light into the dark corners of his grief, reminding him of the joy life could still hold even after profound loss. The tension between them grew quietly, like an undercurrent beneath the surface of everyday life, never spoken, always felt, a gentle but persistent pull that neither could fully resist. They continued navigating their grief together, creating new routines, cherishing old memories, and allowing their bond to evolve naturally, carefully, and emotionally. The house, once silent and mournful, now hummed with quiet intimacy and subtle romance, a gentle warmth born from shared sorrow, companionship, and the awakening of feelings neither expected but both could no longer deny. And as Emily lay awake at night, thinking of the day's shared moments, and Richard stared at her empty chair across the room, they both understood that the path ahead was uncertain, fraught with questions they dared not voice, yet filled with a connection that promised both healing and an emotional closeness that could not be ignored, leaving their hearts suspended in anticipation, longing, and the delicate tension of emotions yet to be fully explored. The following months brought a mixture of healing and new challenges for Emily and Richard, as the house that had once felt empty and cold now carried warmth, laughter, and subtle intimacy that neither had anticipated. Emily found herself noticing the small, tender gestures of her father more than ever, the way he made her coffee just the way she liked it, the way he remembered every little detail she mentioned, and the gentle encouragement he gave her when she doubted herself. Richard, too, realized how much he relied on her presence, how her laughter and thoughtful words had begun to fill a space in his life that had been hollow since her mother's passing. One sunny afternoon, they decided to clean the backyard together, a task that soon turned into playful banter and laughter, the kind of laughter that reminded them of happier times, and yet carried a bittersweet edge because of the absence of the woman who had once brought them together. As they worked side by side, their hands accidentally brushed multiple times, and each touch sent an unexpected warmth through both of them, a subtle electricity that made their hearts race and left them momentarily breathless. Emily tried to ignore it, attributing it to closeness and shared grief, but deep inside, she knew it was something more complicated. Something stirring emotions she hadn't fully understood until now. Richard caught himself staring at her in ways that felt both protective and tender, feeling a longing he couldn't entirely explain, a pull toward her that went beyond the boundaries he had always known. Yet, there was a silent understanding that neither could voice, a delicate tension that hovered between them, unspoken but palpable, growing stronger with each passing day. Over dinner that evening, as rain softly tapped against the windows, they shared stories of their childhood, memories of Emily's mother, and their dreams for the future, each word layered with warmth, longing, and the faint ache of unspoken desire. Emily felt her heart swell with emotion as she watched her father speak, noticing the softness in his eyes, the gentle cadence of his voice, and the way he seemed to notice her in ways no one else ever had. Richard, on his side, realized that these moments with Emily had become the highlight of his days, the comfort he craved, the bond that kept him going, and yet he feared crossing the invisible line that separated fatherly love from something more. One evening, while going through old letters her mother had written to them, Emily discovered a final note addressed to both of them, urging them to continue supporting one another, to cherish life, and to find happiness even after loss. The words resonated deeply, giving Emily courage to express her feelings without fear, and she found herself hugging her father tightly, feeling the warmth of his embrace, a closeness that was both familiar and new, comforting yet stirring emotions she hadn't anticipated. Richard hugged her back just as tightly, realizing that he, too, was experiencing feelings that went beyond simple familial affection, a mix of gratitude, admiration, longing, and a quiet, unspoken love that he had never thought possible. Their days became filled with small, tender routines, morning coffee together, walks in the park, sharing music, cooking meals side by side, and lingering conversations late into the night. Each moment deepened their bond, blurring the lines between grief, companionship, and something more intimate, a connection neither fully understood but both could no longer ignore. Emily felt a new sense of confidence in expressing herself, opening up about her dreams, fears, and even the subtle stirrings of emotion she was beginning to recognize. Richard listened intently, sometimes offering advice, sometimes simply holding her hand, letting her know he was there, a pillar of support and a source of comfort. The emotional closeness they shared began to cultivate a quiet romance, not through words or explicit acts, but through touch, glance, shared silences, and moments of vulnerability that revealed the depth of their feelings. One late night, as thunder rolled across the sky and rain streaked the windows, they found themselves huddled together on the couch, sharing a blanket, hearts pounding with the unspoken, mutual acknowledgement of their growing attraction. Emily's head rested lightly on Richard's shoulder, her hand brushing against his, each accidental touch sending waves of warmth and longing through them both. Richard's heart ached with a mix of desire and hesitation, aware of the societal boundaries but unable to deny the comfort and intensity of emotions that Emily stirred within him. They spoke in whispers, about memories, dreams, grief, and hope, each conversation layered with intimacy and a gentle tension that neither had experienced before. Days turned into weeks, and their bond only deepened, evolving into a subtle, emotional romance that was tender, heartfelt, and profoundly human, rooted in shared loss, mutual understanding, and the undeniable connection that life had thrust upon them. Emily began to see Richard in a new light, recognizing the depth of his vulnerability, the gentleness beneath his stoic exterior, and the warmth that drew her to him in ways she had never imagined possible. Richard, in turn, was captivated by her compassion, her intelligence, and the way she made him feel alive, cherished, and understood, emotions that had lain dormant for years. Together, they navigated this delicate, complex relationship with care, balancing grief, affection, and desire, understanding that their connection was rare, fragile, and something to be honored with respect and subtlety. One evening, after a long day filled with shared tasks and laughter, they sat on the porch watching the sunset, a golden glow washing over the yard, and for a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was filled with unspoken emotions, love, longing, grief, and the quiet recognition that they were no longer just father and daughter in the traditional sense, but two souls who had found solace, understanding, and even a form of love in each other. Emily rested her head on Richard's shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart, a rhythm that mirrored her own longing, and Richard gently rested his hand on hers, a tender reassurance that they would face life together, honoring the past while embracing the unexpected closeness that had grown between them. As twilight faded into night, they remained on the porch, side by side, hearts full of emotion, and an unspoken promise lingering in the air, a promise to care, to cherish, and to navigate the delicate dance of feelings that life had gifted them, a connection that was deep, emotional, romantic, and profoundly human, leaving both Emily and Richard forever changed, their hearts intertwined in ways that neither grief nor time could ever undo. In the quiet of that night, with the stars peeking through the clouds and the soft rustle of leaves around them, they realized that life had a way of bringing unexpected love, tender closeness, and emotional healing in the most unforeseen circumstances, and that together, they had found a bond that was unbreakable, heartfelt, and enduring, a story of grief transformed into love, loss transformed into connection, and loneliness transformed into the profound intimacy of two hearts learning to beat in harmony once more.